Welcome to the Pivot Point Podcast. This season, I'm focused on real-time hot topics in the gender equality and diversity spaces. In this episode, I will break down a current event, provide my point of view, what I liked and what I'd like to see change, and leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. I share this information because equality is a candid conversation. It takes bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger together. We are one. So let's dig into this week's hot topics. So I picked 3 for you this week because I simply could not pick one. It's been a very busy, active week. I started my week actually headed out west to speak California Women Lead Conference, and I took my 5-year-old daughter, Jane. For anyone that follows my work or has seen me speak, she's very central to my why, my purpose for the work, and creating a space where it is more equal someday for her when she enters the workforce. And so I thought, hey, I'm going to Disneyland to speak. I got to bring my 5-year-old. And we had a blast. We had a great day. And we did have a run-in with the princess exhibit that I did not care for. I wrote about that in this week's blog, so I'll link to that and fill you in on those details. But it was fascinating to kind of watch the world through her eyes. A story I wanted to share with you this week happened the next day at my speaking engagement. I had trouble lining up kind of caretaking for her, and I thought, hey, it's an hour-long talk. I'm sure I can find a spot for her in the back of the room, set her up with her tablet. She'll be good to go. And for the most part, she was. And no one even noticed that she was there with me. I'd asked the conference organizer, and she said, yeah, boss mom, go for it. So I'm about halfway through the talk, and I said, and by the way, the real purpose for the work that I do, and this is usually what I start with, but I kind of back-ended into it this time, is sitting here in this room. And I pointed to the back of the room, and Jane's little head popped up. And the women, and one male ally was in attendance at this session, applauded. And I thought, well, I haven't done anything special, but that reaction really energized me. To think that I think we're entering a real new norm in the workplace where motherhood, fatherhood, parenthood is welcomed, and that we don't have to separate the spheres of our life. And the reason I do what I do is really for her. And so keeping her out of that doesn't seem to make sense to me. Obviously, there's professionalism that goes with that. I would not take her to a major keynote, for example, or a client session that was really candid and vulnerable. However, in this session, I think it was really appropriate. And I had a neurologist come up to me afterwards, and she said, I just want you to know how important it is that you do things like this with your daughter. At 5 years old, her brain is really taking in all of the patterns in the world around her. And her seeing her mother speak in front of a group and having them listen the way that we did to you today is very powerful for her. And it brought tears to my eyes to hear her say that and validate my actions in such a way. And so I wanted to share that with you. I'll link to the blog for more details on the backstory with the princesses. But for the most part, it was a very successful trip. We'll say the red eye home was not my favorite part of the journey with a 5-year-old, but we made it. And since then, I've had some challenging conversations with some of my clients that are really looking to step into the gender equality space and get men engaged as allies. And one of the things I do is our Women's Leadership Academy. In our Women's Leadership Academy, we're going on our 4th cohort now, and we do these internally for organizations. And I was having a call with a CPA firm who was very much interested in doing an in-house Women's Leadership Academy for their Women Inspire group. And we had a great conversation, and it came to a point where they said, well, what about the men? And one of the partners, a male partner, was in attendance. He's a male ally sponsor for the organization, which, by the way, great best practice. He shared, I'm concerned that men aren't going to be involved in this, that they're just going to see this as a women's only leadership track, that we're just investing in women. And that's certainly not the perception we want to create. However, I have found having a safe place for women to talk to each other is important. They say things that are different than they would in front of a mixed crowd. And so the conclusion we came to is, why don't we have a joint track? 6 sessions, 3 of them are joint. The other 3 are separate, where men and women can identify with which one they'd like to take. For women, the issues that I see, the challenges that they express seem to be a bit different than men, confidence, negotiation, influence, things like that. Engaging allies. On the male track, the idea that we had was how to be an inclusive leader, how to be empathetic and how to communicate in a way that is leveraging my own self-awareness and also landing with the person and being intentional and candid. And so 2 separate tracks, but really a holistic leadership journey that we can participate together and separately. And then at the end, compare notes on what we learned and present in a graduation format, which I love to really cement the learning and propel it forward, because the learning doesn't happen in the classroom. The learning happens out in the field when we're talking to customers and talking to our coworkers and really using the tools that we learned. And so I thought that was a really fun answer to that question that we collaboratively brainstormed. Cannot take credit for that one. My client certainly led me through that journey. But I just wanted to share that with you. If you're wrestling in your organization with what does it look like for our leadership journeys, male, female, to create a separate thing for women, is that, creating a perception that things aren't equal. We certainly don't want that. So it's something to consider, is think about how could we work together, but also have safe places for men and women to share their experiences separately, because we know them to be vastly different in the workplace, those experiences. So that was the second topic I picked for you today. And then the third thing I wanted to share, I had a conversation with the diversity and inclusion officer that is really working intentionally on creating a holistic D&I strategy and a roadmap to go with that, which I rarely hear that the sophisticated organizations are getting this, right? I think that's where we're starting to see things as a full roadmap of activities. It's not just splash in the pan, unconscious bias training, check the box, empathy training, check the box. Actually, I just saw new data this week that only 50% of organizations do any D&I education at all. And so when I talked to this officer and she shared her vision and where they were going in the programming and how many work streams she has with people engaged on her team leading them, so it's not just her, it's truly embedded in the organization, I got excited. I thought, wow, this is where things are going. And so I offer that to you as you really think about not just your vision, your mission for diversity and inclusion and equality, but think about what the roadmap looks like. Think about where do we want to be 3 years from now? That doesn't necessarily mean, this percentage of women in leadership, this percentage of people of color in our organization. Go beyond that, broad and that diversity definition, and think about, what kind of organization do we want to be? What do we want to look like? What do we want to be like? And then what activities do we need? What education, what skill gaps do we have that we need to close to get there? And that's exactly what she had done. Think about that. Think about, it goes beyond unconscious bias and empathy skills. It goes to much deeper inclusive leadership and teaching our teams how to lead like an ally and embedding it in manager training, in activities, in team meetings, in daily activities that we're having. So it's threaded throughout the organization's culture. And then it doesn't feel like a separate activity when it feels like a part of how we behave. And so think about these things. Think about what it means to have separate ally tracks. We talked about the Women's Leadership Academy. How can you get other genders involved in that? Think about your roadmap. Do you have one? Likely you don't. Are you even doing diversity, inclusion, and equality training? Is that something that you could bring up to your leadership team or to other leaders in your organization and see, hey, what's the right starting point and what activities do we want to do? And by the way, a lot of that you can do in-house. There's wonderful podcasts, videos, tutorials. Our website's full of tools that you can use to seed those conversations. And, you can always think about external expertise that you can bring in when appropriate. Something like unconscious bias is pretty specific and requires usually a skill set that requires some certified training around it. But you can also train someone internally on your team and have them educate the rest of your staff. So there's lots of options out there. What I'd like to leave you with is some action items. So think about the conversations we've had this week. Think about what it means to be an ally for you. Think about the education that you're offering for your employees to learn how to be inclusive leaders, how to thrive in a diverse, inclusive, equal workspace where everyone's voice can be heard. And think about how can you intentionally create that roadmap of activities that really shows your team that you're committed to diversity, inclusion, and equality. And so if you like this episode, I'll link to our blog that talks more about my Take Your Daughter to Work Day experience, as well as some of the tools I referenced around the D&I roadmap. We have a video on that as well that we'll link to. And be sure to stay tuned to next week's episode where we'll dig into some other fun hot topics. Did you know that you can find all 3 seasons of our 40 plus episodes at nextpivotpoint.com, and you can sign up for our next free online workshop, get access to our 5 questions to get the gender equality conversation started in your organization, and ask me your questions directly. I appreciate you listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Simply hit the share button, connect with me on Instagram at nextpivotpoint, and search LinkedIn. I'm posting daily at Julie Kratz, Kratz. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together. We are one.